Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into a piece that you flagged for us, Douglas Murray's review of On Democracies and Death Cults, Israel and the Future of Civilization.
That's right. Yeah, it definitely tackles some heavy themes, very current.
Absolutely. So the plan is to really unpack the main arguments Murray's making here, looking at the threats he sees facing Israel, and crucially, what he thinks that means for Western democracies more broadly.
Exactly. It's more than just a review, isn't it? It's his take on what he portrays as a really fundamental kind of civilizational struggle.
Right.
And his core argument, which is what we'll focus on, is that Israel is basically on the front line against what he calls death cults.
Death cults. Yeah, the phrase definitely jumps out.
It does. He means these ideologies that, for him, seem to prioritize destruction almost above everything else. So we need to explore what he means by that and why he thinks it's so critical right now.
Okay, so let's start there. This idea of death cults.
Yeah.
It's obviously provocative. How does he actually define them in the review? Is it literal cults or something else?
Yeah, it's a good question. It seems he's not using it in that strict sociological way, you know?
Right, not like Jonestown or something.
No, exactly. It's more about ideologies, movements whose defining characteristic, as he sees it, is their ultimate aim and the values they hold.
Oh, okay.
So prioritizing death, destruction, maybe martyrdom as a central goal, a rejection of life, progress, compromise. It's about the underlying belief system driving them.
Got it. So it's the why behind any violence, the value system itself. And he points to specific threats through this particular lens. What are the main examples he pulls out?
He focuses on a few key things. First, there's radical Islamist terrorism.
Okay.
Murray looks at what he sees as the sort of theological and political ideas fueling these groups. He talks about a worldview that often glorifies martyrdom, seeks to eliminate enemies, almost a kind of nihilism, he suggests. Then, secondly, he points very directly to the Iranian regime's nuclear ambitions. He frames that as another massive threat, obviously with huge potential consequences for Israel, but also the whole region.
Yeah, those feel like very direct existential threats. But he also spends quite a bit of time talking about anti-Zionism. How does that fit into his death cult framework? That seems maybe
less straightforward. It is, yeah, and that's where his argument gets perhaps more complex, maybe more controversial for some.
right.
He makes a distinction. He says, look, legitimate criticism of Israeli government policy is one thing, but he argues that certain kinds of anti-Zionism go way beyond that.
Beyond policy critique.
Yes. He contends they become a fundamental rejection of Israel's right to even exist as a Jewish state. He talks about the use of what he considers distorted historical narratives or applying double standards, condemning Israel much more harshly than other countries for similar actions.
Yeah.
And he suggests that sometimes this kind of intense anti-Zionism can mask a deeper hostility, not just to the government, but to the very idea of Israel as a sort of Western-style democracy in that region.
So he sees some forms of it aligning with those rejectionist, destructive tendencies he's talking about.
That seems to be his argument, yes.
Yeah.
That it shares that rejectionist core he identifies in what he calls death cults.
Interesting. So the real emphasis here is on the ideology, the engine driving these different threats, rather than just looking at isolated events.
Exactly that. It connects to this bigger point Murray makes about the power of ideology, whether it's coming from a specific religious interpretation, like with radical Islamism, or from certain secular political views that manifest as extreme anti-Zionism.
Right.
The common thread, as Murray presents it, is this deep intolerance, this refusal to compromise or find common ground.
Okay, so given how serious he thinks these threats are, it sounds like Murray's pretty critical of how the West has responded. What are his main points there?
Yeah, he definitely expresses concern. He sees the Western response as often being, inconsistent, maybe tepid.
Tepid, how so?
He suggests that sometimes things like political correctness or maybe certain aspects of identity politics can get in the way of seeing these threats clearly for what they are. Blinding societies, perhaps. And he also criticizes what he views as a kind of moral relativism, a hesitation to clearly say this is an aggressor and this is someone defending themselves. He thinks that reluctance weakens the ability to actually counter the dangers effectively.
So he's calling for a much clearer, more assertive stance from Western countries. Less ambiguity.
That seems to be the implication, yes, a less equivocal position.
And he also zooms in on Israel itself, the specific challenges it faces. What does he highlight there?
Well, he really emphasizes Israel's unique situation, a relatively small democracy
Right.
in a very volatile part of the world, facing constant security threats, terrorism, and also these ongoing international efforts to delegitimize it.
The pressure must be immense.
Exactly. And despite all that pressure, Murray points to Israel's resilience, its commitment to democratic values, almost holding it up as a kind of inspiration or maybe a model of Western values under fire.
And he connects this directly to global security, right? It's not just about Israel's challenges in isolation.
Absolutely not. That's key to his whole argument. These ideologies targeting Israel, he argues, they don't just stop there.
They spread.
Well, he sees them as part of a much wider challenge, a challenge to the basic principles, the values that underpin Western civilization itself. Instability, especially when driven by these kinds of extreme ideologies, can have ripple effects globally.
So what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East.
That's his point. It can inspire similar movements elsewhere, undermine democratic norms. He positions Israel's situation as a kind of bellwether, a sign of broader trends.
He also brings up the media, public discourse. How does he see their role in all this?
Yeah, he's critical there too. He voices concern about what he perceives as bias in some media coverage, the spread of misinformation, especially regarding Israel and the conflict.
You mean like narratives taking hold?
Precisely. He suggests this can lead to a really skewed public understanding, maybe amplifying narratives critical of Israel while perhaps downplaying the threats it contends with. He makes a call for more accuracy, more nuance, more, intellectual honesty in how these really difficult issues are discussed.
Now, Murray himself, his writing style,
Yeah.
it's known for being pretty direct, sometimes confrontational even. Does that come through here?
Yeah.
And what do you think his main goal is with this review?
Oh, absolutely. The style is very much Murray direct, uncompromising. He doesn't really pull punches.
Yeah.
You can tell he's drawing on his knowledge of history, politics, philosophy, and his intent. It really seems to be to provoke thought, to shake readers out of maybe complacency.
A wake-up call, perhaps?
Kind of, to force a harder look, maybe an uncomfortable look, at the threats he believes Israel and the West are facing. He wants a more realistic, maybe more assertive response.
So if we boil it all down, the central message is really a warning, isn't it? A warning against complacency and a call to actively defend liberal democratic values against these death cults he describes.
That's it, exactly. The core warning is, don't be complacent. Recognize the nature of these ideological threats and stand up for the values and institutions of liberal democracy. He portrays it as a really critical moment.
And within that defense, he positions Israel as a key partner, a key ally.
Yes, unequivocally. The review makes it very clear he sees Israel as a vital ally, right there on the front lines of this struggle he's outlining. A democratic state actively confronting these ideologies he sees as so dangerous.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the key takeaway here for everyone listening. This review by Douglas Murray, looking at on democracies and death cults, essentially argues that Israel faces these interconnected threats: radical Islamism, Iran, certain forms of anti-Zionism, all driven, in his view, by destructive ideologies.
Right. And crucially, he contends these aren't just Israel's problems. They have profound implications for Western democracies, too.
Yeah, he raises serious questions about the West's response, highlights Israel's specific vulnerabilities, but also its resilience, talks about global security being interconnected, and the role of media narratives in shaping how we see it all.
It really serves as this stark call to action to defend democratic values, and he sees Israel as absolutely central to that defense effort.
So the final thought for you, our listener, building on this, it really makes you think, doesn't it? When faced with ideologies that seem to prioritize destruction, as Murray describes them, what does it actually mean for us as individuals and as societies to effectively defend our own values?
That's a powerful question. And also maybe, how can we foster a deeper, more nuanced understanding of these incredibly complex global conflicts, especially when there are such strong, often simplified narratives swirling around? Something definitely worth mulling over.